What's up guys, Ishizu here, welcome back. Today I wanted to take a look at the meta because with the release of Photon Hypernova being pretty much right around the corner, we can expect some few changes that are going to implement in the meta game. And even though we are still in a tier 0 format and we can't expect too much to change, we still have some really good cards in the new set that are going to pretty much change some decks being a lot stronger than they used to be, and some new stuff that we can expect to pretty much try to fight against the Ishizu Tearlaments, which is still not extremely possible, but they do have a chance. So now let's take a look at the top 10 decks that I think are going to be the most represented post-Photon Hypernova. Number 10, Draco Slayers. Now, Pendulums are in a weird spot because with the release of a ban list pretty much being unexpected, but it could happen anytime, we can always expect that Pendulums can get more cards back, specifically Electromite. So Pendulums can go from being number 10 on the spot to being like in the top 5 or something in case we get Electromite back, or something like Kirin. Anything is possible at this point. So the cards that they can get back are always going to be something that we can look forward to. But for now, I feel like Draco Slayers are still a decent deck, although it's a type of deck that tries to make a board that cannot be broken by searching field spells and doing a lot of negation stuff. So I feel like there are decks that can do that a lot better, even below the rank of Ishizu tier. So that's why I have it at number 10 for now. But again, Pendulums are always the threat that can become really broken in case Konami decides to take action and give them help from the ban list. Number 9, Gishki. Now, Gishki are getting new cards in Photon Hypernova, and oh boy, the support these cards are getting are absolutely insane. And when you combine Gishkis with Sprite, you can make some insane endboards that I feel like are going to be really good moving forward. And because of how fan-favorite the deck used to be in the past, and because of how notorious the deck is for the hand loops that it used to have back in the day, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are going to experiment with it, and they're going to try to make it work. So, at least for the beginning of the new format, after post-Photon Hypernova, you're going to see this deck a lot because of people experimenting. We don't really know exactly how good the deck really is, but for now, you're going to see it quite a few, so you need to be prepared to face some Gishki down the road for the first few weeks. Number 8, Sorcel. Now, Sorcel is a deck that has been power crept quite a bit. It hasn't really been hit aside from the Arch Nemesis cards getting hit, being able to lock your opponent completely, but the thing about this deck is that a lot of people really love this deck. When you see someone playing Sorcel, you know they're a dedicated player, because there's not really a reason to play this deck right now unless you love it completely. So when you're playing against Sorcel players, they know exactly everything about the deck. They know the ins and outs of the deck, they know all the matchups. So the reason I have Sorcel still in the list is because I know that when you're playing against the deck, you're playing against a really good pilot, and they can navigate fields and boards completely different from any other type player to be able to win with a deck that, even as a mid-range deck, it still is very consistent, very powerful. It can run a lot of hand traps to be able to disrupt the plays of the meta decks, and they can adapt to whatever format they're in. So this deck, even though it is not nearly as powerful as it used to be, this deck is still really good to this day. Number 7, Naturia. Now, Naturia is a deck that can abuse the Ishizu cards very similarly to Ishizu Tearlaments. They're not quite as powerful, of course, but it's still a deck that can do a lot, and just because of how unfair the Ishizu stuff are, any deck that can utilize them really well, like a Naturia, because they're all earth monsters, they do have somewhat of an advantage over other decks because they can use such a powerful engine, and Naturia is a deck that can bring out really good interruptions, and it's very consistent with Ishizu cards. As long as they're all at 3, which they still are unfortunately, the deck can use them very consistently. If Ishizu cards start get hitting because of Ishizu Tearlaments, then yes, that is going to cause collateral damage on Naturias as well, and they're not going to be just as powerful. But for now, as long as these cards are at full power, they're all 4 of them at 3, then you can expect Naturia to still be a really good deck. And people try this deck over Ishizu tier because they don't really like playing mirror matches, or they just don't want to play the deck everyone else plays in a tier 0 format, so they're trying other stuff with Ishizu cards, and Naturia I feel like is the best thing you can make out of the Ishizu cards aside from Tearlaments. This is why people play this deck. Number 6, Labyrinth. Now, Labyrinth is the new age Eldritch. This deck has pretty much overtaken Eldritch in every type of form. It does what Eldritch does, but a lot better and a lot more consistently. And with Big Welcome Labyrinth coming out in Photon Hypernova, this deck is going to become much more consistent. And the thing is, this deck runs pretty much the same package as Eldritch, that it's more consistent. They're trying to get a big body on the field by using trap cards, and then they're using their disruption trap cards to get more advantage, and the actual engine of the deck helps you deal more damage to your opponent. It helps you recycle cards, set trap cards, and yeah, Labyrinth is a deck that, as long as it gets to play, and as long as it gets to go first, because it's a full trap deck, it can be really scary to play against. It can play Floodgates, of course, because we know all trap decks now can play Floodgates, cards like Skill Drain, Soul Drain, goes unmatched. All of that stuff you can implement in the Labyrinth, and you can make a really big impact because we do have floodgates to deal with anything. So if you want to play against Ishizu tier, then you can just main Soul Drain, and there's that. Your opponent cannot do anything. So Labyrinth is the Eldritch of the new format, and it's going to become more powerful with Hypernova, and we can expect to see a lot of people playing it because a lot of people love playing trap decks in formats like this because they just don't want to try to play mirror matches that you have to do like Chain Link 10 in an Ishizu tier matchup. You just try to stun your opponent and they're not going to be able to play. Now let's move to the top 5 of the list. At number 5 we have Branded Bestial. Now this is a deck that is coming back. Despia, Branded Bestial, all of that stuff. It's a deck that it used to be the best deck some time ago. It took kind of a back seat, but now I feel like the deck is at the point where it can do a lot just because of how powerful the Bestials are. A deck that can implement the Bestials not just for the hand trap factor, but mainly as engine pieces as well. Against a format with a deck that relies on the graveyard so heavily like Ishizu tier, you have a good deck at your hands, and the deck is really consistent. Branded Fusion is still a very broken card, even though we have kind of forgotten about it because we have more broken stuff, but again, Branded Fusion is still an amazing card on its own, and this is why Branded Bestial is a deck that can utilize both engines to the fullest, use all of the good dark and light support that they have. Being able to counter Ishizu tier with a really big Bestial package helps as well. So when you have a good matchup against the best deck of the format, then of course you can be a good deck on your own. Number 4, Floowandereeze. Now Floowandereeze again is kind of like a similar deck to Labyrinth, but not really. It's a control stun type deck, but it does it quite differently. We all know what Floowandereeze do at this point. It's a deck that doesn't really use traps to stun your opponent. We have cards like Shifter still at 3, a really powerful card against Ishizu tier, and Floowandereeze players, they just choose to play the deck for the same reason as Labyrinth. They just don't want to let your opponent play. They just don't want to have to deal with all those chain links that Ishizu tier can do and all those effects during both turns. So yeah, Floowandereeze is a little bit better than Labyrinth because it's better going second at Labyrinth. We do have cards like Shifter, which lets you basically make sure that your opponent doesn't do anything and you can get your turn back, and you do have ways to extend. While Labyrinth, it's a deck that regardless of whether you're going first or you're going second, you're pretty much doing the same thing. You're setting 5 trap cards and you're betting your opponent doesn't have something to destroy them all, and then you're trying to chip away at their board that they may turn 1 by using cards that disrupt your opponent like Torrential, or prevent them from building their board again with cards like Skill Drain and all that stuff. So this is why Floowandereeze is a little bit better than Labyrinth because it's better going second, but again, both decks are very similar and they're trying to do similar things. Number 3, Sprite. Now Sprite can be played as pure or with Runic, and both builds are still really good. I just put both in this category because Sprite, even though it can be splashed into other stuff like with Gishki and other decks, I feel like when you play the deck pure or with Runic, it's still the best mix you can have. And Sprite, it's still untouched in the ban list, so it does have all of its tools yet. Being able to still play totally awesome if you want, even with the ban of Ronin Totem, means that the ban list did not really do its job when it came to hitting this deck because a lot of people are playing cards like the Nimble stuff and all that stuff. There are so many good level 2 packages you can play in the deck like this that is going to make it good regardless. So Sprite, it's still a really powerful deck. It's not nearly as powerful as it used to be when it first came out, and that was mainly because people didn't really know how to play Tearlaments back then. They didn't have enough time to experiment with the deck, and of course we did not have the Ishizu cards by that point, but I still feel like Tearlaments were better even without the Ishizu cards than Sprite was. It's just that we had pretty much seen everything that Sprite could from the OCG, so we kind of followed that trend until people started to experiment more. So this is why Sprite is never going to be stronger than Tearlaments unless the ban list completely nukes Tearlaments off the face of the earth. We don't know if and that is going to happen, but still, with all that being said, Sprite is very gloriously at the number 3 spot, and it would have been at the number 2 spot if not for Photon Hypernova, because the number 2 deck that we're going to talk right after is basically a new deck. It's not completely new, but as an archetype of its own, it's kinda new due to Photon Hypernova. So speaking of which, at number 2 we have Kashtira. Now Kashtira is not a new archetype, but it's as new of an archetype as it gets because of Photon Hypernova. We see cards like Fenrir already in a lot of other archetypes even before the new set, but because of Photon Hypernova and the support that it gives to Kashtira, it can function as an archetype on its own, and it's actually really powerful. Being able to use 1-card starters and also look at your opponent's extra deck to take the most important stuff that they have means that your opponent is going to play completely differently. For example, people in Ishizu Tearlaments were getting away with playing only 1-Kit Kalos up until this point, but with Kashtira being now in the meta, you can no longer play 1-Kit Kalos. You have to play more than one, so you have to adjust stuff like in your extra deck, because you know that if you have a 1-of card in your extra deck that is crucial to your piece and all of your strategy, there is always the fear of it getting destroyed by Kashtira, so you have to play multiple copies of it, so it makes you work the way you would working differently. So Kashtira is a really, really good deck. It has really easy OTKs, it's really good going first and going second, and if not for Ishizu tier, I feel like it would have been like close to a tier 0 deck, and it's possible that it still might happen if Ishizu tier gets hit in the next ban list, and Kashtira, for still being quite new, they're not going to touch it too much, maybe some few hits here and there, but I cannot expect too much, so maybe this is the new age deck that we're going to have to deal with from now on after we get a ban list, but for now it's at number 2 because no new ban list on the horizon, so we have to work with what we have. And at number 1, to nobody's surprise, we have Ishizu Tearlaments. Is there anything I need to explain about this deck at this point? I'm pretty sure everyone knows exactly what this deck can do, exactly why it's a tier 0 status right now. It's pretty much one of the strongest decks that we've ever had in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! I feel like it's very, very similar to Dragon Rulers. I mean, always regarding when Dragon Rulers were on their peak, because right now Dragon Rulers as an archetype, they would not be the greatest even if they were at full power, but regarding of the timeline that they were in, Ishizu tier feels like at this level, and the OCGs has proven that similar to Rulers, regardless of how much you hit them, they're still going to be really, really good. So I'm considering the fact that Konami might have to do like 2 to maybe 3 ban lists to deal with this archetype, just like they did with Rulers back in the day. We're gonna have to wait and see, but for now it's still a really broken archetype that it has to be addressed some way or another, and as long as it doesn't, it's going to stay at the number 1 slot in this list at the tier 0 status, and people are going to be tired of seeing it all the time. So yep, that's the list, guys. Comment down below if you feel like there are any other archetypes that you think are going to be really, really good. For the rogue category, we can include so many different stuff that the spots for like 10 and 9 can be very, very interchangeable, because we do have really good decks. It's just like they're not nearly as good as Ishizu tier, and that's why they have been forgotten. But again, we all just need a good ban list, and we can see a decent format. So any other deck you think that has potential to be good, maybe after a ban list, comment down below. Let's see exactly what other decks got really good support from Photon Hypernova, and if they have the tools necessary to be able to compete. And again, we can always just wait and expect for the better for the game. So yep, that's the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.